Good morning, everyone. It's really awesome to see a chatty audience early on a Sunday morning. Creative Mornings is a breakfast lecture series, which is a global movement, and we started Creative Mornings Bangalore as the first Indian chapter 13 years ago. And when I say we, I mean it is organized by Teapoy, which is a media production house, and we have a bunch of people who come on board. Creative Mornings runs only because of local partnership that we, have support of in our chapter. Today, we're in this beautiful space called Away Center, which is a co-working space, and you can hear more about it from the staff here. We'd like to thank Dominic and Ashwini, who helped us and supported us by hosting the talk the second time this year. So we'd like to thank Away. We'd like to thank Candor Concepts, Harish and his entire team that's helping us capture the entire event today, because all of our talks go up online as a global repository, and Zero Diversity and Mudfingers as our gifting partners. We have our global supporter as Adobe, and it really trickles down from there, and that's how we are able to run our events. You've seen the registration page and other things online, and this is where we get our support from. And all of our volunteers today, Lavanya, Kiran, Santosh, thank you guys for helping out month on month. This is what we get tagged at on social media. So please help us spread the word. It's very organic. So every time we see numbers, all of this is organic. And, we'd like to thank everyone who's helped us get the word out. This is the YouTube page. So if you want to check out our earlier talks, this is our 114th talk. So most of, all of our talks go up online within a month. You're able to check that out. And, Creative Mornings works on a monthly theme, which we interpret as a local chapter. So this was what last month looked at. The theme was Create. And we had a Kathak artist talk about the aspect of creation in Kathak. So similarly, this month, the theme happens to be Curate. And for us, the first person we thought about was honestly Dipti, because first of all, we go back with Dipti. We were just talking about it. 2018 was when we, first met Dipti. And of course, currently she is Deputy General Manager of Auditorium Operations at PCPA. But she's had a bunch of work that's happened over 2 decades, which started with, cultural management and arts programs and festival organization and much more. I'm going to let her talk about it. But, she's had engagements with some of the landmark spaces of the city, which has shaped the city over the last few decades. So whether it's the Courtyard, Bangalore International Center, Jagriti Theatre, which she helped set up. So what she does is build systems and then moves to the next space. So currently she's at PCPA doing just that. So without any more delay, I'm really, really happy to invite you, Deepti, to share with us about your work.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Karishma. Thank you, Vishwesh. Thank you, Creative Mornings Bengaluru, for having me here today. And thank you all for joining us on a Sunday morning. I know it can be quite tough sometimes to give up your rest day. So really appreciate it. Um, the first response that I had when Karishma and Vishwesh came to me with this theme of curate was of course, imposter syndrome, but I'm not a curator. I don't know if any of you also feel that way without necessarily having an official title about it, but I find curation as Kamini Soni at MAP used to say. She says curation and art is in columns. It's in the way we draw our kajal. It's in the way we dress. It's my first happiest memory of curation is really mixtapes. I don't know if any of you have had that experience of creating a mixtape either for yourself or for a friend, sometimes a crush. So that's really where curation began for me. Um, and I stand before you here today as more of a provocateur. I think that's more of an identity that I like to own, where I really like to ask more questions than try to offer answers. I feel like there are a lot more people who all have different answers, different perspectives, which is also part of how we curate our lives. So when I say curate, and when I think of the word curate, I really like to expand that to a very, very large understanding of the word itself. Um, so for the purpose of this conversation today, I've looked at three aspects of curation: spaces, experiences, and life. And in my role as a provocateur, I would like to invite you to ask many questions of yourself, ask questions of each other, ask questions of the situations and the lives that you have built for yourselves. Um, and what is it that really makes us who we are today? I'll try to weave in the story of my work with the, as Karishma wanted me to talk about, the way Bangalore as a city has changed, has grown, has evolved, has devolved as well in some ways. But I thought it would be interesting to use that through these three concentric circles, with life, of course, being our core. I would like to understand how many here have lived in Bangalore for, say, 20 years and more? Okay. Please do look around the room so that it's interesting for you to know. What about 10 years, 10 to 20 years? Okay, lovely. What about 5 to 10 years? Okay, all right. Yes, that's right. Well done. And what about less than 5 years? Okay. So I think you are a perfect microcosm of what the city is today. And it's such a wonderful um, experience wherever I go, I see this same kind of mix of gathering of people who've been here for as long as they can remember, for those who've just joined and are looking for things to do. So, how are we also curating our Bangalore experience? Is another very apt question, I feel. So, with spaces, if we look at what is it that spaces represent, my very first job in the arts sector was right after I graduated from my undergrad degree. I went to Bombay and came back. My very, very first job was building Jagriti Theatre in Whitefield. For any sub 25-year-old, that is one of the best jobs I think, in my opinion, one could have. Because not only was I literally doing construction management, sort of haranguing like a bratty 22-year-old talking to PMCs, project management consultants, architects, and so on, and saying, when is this going to get finished? And of course, it took forever. Um, but it was a wonderful experience, which really began my journey of curating in these concentric circles. I was able to do so many different things, um, which is really the first point of exposure, right? What are the possibilities? Could I go in the direction of programming? Could I go in the direction of, oh my God, construction management, never again? Uh, However, that is also ironic. Um, could I go in the direction of building more spaces? And that's the one I think I ended up choosing. Um, a friend of mine once told me something about me that I found very interesting. He said, you seem to be the midwife of creative spaces. I loved that. I was like, okay, I'm done. Ultimate. It's a bit grandiose, of course, but I do enjoy building systems, curating them. And so that leads me to what is it that makes us go to spaces? Um, so Another space that I worked with in Bangalore, again, a new space, was the courtyard, which now people will know as the courtyard, they'll know as the conservatory, there's the middle room. So it's become this wonderful melting pot. But when we first started, it was literally Akhila's Ajji's house. And it was the courtyard of the house that we were trying to do something interesting with. And so we built a little black box space, which is now the middle room. And the idea was really to say, we're in the heart of the city. KH Road is really now proper heart of the city, right? What is it that we can do? How can we bring people into the space? So then we started going into the curation of that. Somewhere along the way, we realized that it wasn't going to be a traditional performing arts space, which is how I often approach space building as. Um, and so then Akila started talking about community. And so you'll notice the Instagram handle is also called the Courtyard Community, which was a little bit um, predictive of what the space turned out to be. Uh, and so through the course of the Courtyard's life, which is also where we first met, Karishma and I and Vishwesh and I, when the Creative Mornings Bangalore session happened there in 2018, it was an exploration, right? What are the conversations that we can have in a space that is really not defined by any stage trussing, by a physical stage? What kind of experiences could we have over there? Um, and what is it that made us kept going back? So when I jump to the next, not quite the chronological next thing that I did, but the next new space that I helped work with was the Museum of Art and Photography. So another amazing institution that's really filled out the landscape of Bangalore and the cultural landscape of Bangalore. Um, why do we keep going back to map? Obviously, one part is the content. Yes, Vaishnavi worked on map. Um, I think it's more than the exhibitions. I think it's the fact that you're allowed to imagine in this space, right? Uh, and I'm touching upon all of these things because that's what sort of connects us back to the core concentric circle of being, of life. What are these experiences that we are searching for, that we are curating? What is it that they're actually adding to our life? Because ultimately, why are we doing this? Why are we on this little blue dot, right? It's to experience life. Um, so at this point, I really want to pause and do a little exercise with everyone. Um, since we've been talking about cultural spaces so far, I'd like us to take 3 minutes, and if you could say out loud to me in one by one, how many arts and culture spaces we can think of in Bangalore. And it could be anything that you call an arts and culture space. Yeah, so I'm starting my timer. Go ahead. Rangashankara, Bangalore Creative Circus, BIC, NGMA, CKP, One Shanti Road, Sabha, Rangoli Metro Art Gallery, yeah, Chaudaya, Indian Heritage Academy, okay, Sumukha Gallery, yes, Church Street, the whole street. Chalo, why not? Science Gallery, Venkatappa Art Gallery, Bangalore Design Center, nice one, yes. Suchitra Film Society, Art Gallery, yes. Offstage, Bangalore. Ah, thanks, man. Ata Galata, yes. Kash, Nrityagram. Oh, that's a little bit outside the Bangalore, but yeah, for sure. Uh, Champaka, okay. Courtyard Kuta, yes. NGM has already been done. Art Coach. Medai, yes. Middle Room. Anyone who hasn't said anything yet? Play Practice. Blue Room. Government Museum. I heard Ravindra Kalakshetra. Yes. Cup. Oh, interesting. Okay, Kaban Park. Why not? Why not? Yes. Panchavati. Panchavati when you really get involved, huh? ADA Rangamandira. Kinkini. Yeah. Artisera. Sakshi. Oh, Janapada Loka. Guys, this is amazing. And we still have a minute to go. Okay, I'll stop here. But just look at the wealth that we have. This is something that I often um, forget because I'm in my own little pigeonhole. But it's wonderful to see the mushrooming of all of these spaces, right? I of course only asked for arts and culture event spaces, uh, but now what are all of the other spaces? We won't go into this exercise again, but what are all of these other spaces? Could a way center be considered a creative space? I would say yes. Um, and so drawing this back to the core of how do we curate life, how do we curate experiences, and how do we curate spaces, it is there is a certain responsibility for those who create space, who curate spaces, to be able to offer something to the widest possible range of artists, people, interests, creative minds, whichever way you want to slice society and people in not at all a gory way. Um, which brings me to the next concentric circle that I think about, which is experiences. Um, from my area of work, my almost my entire identity is wrapped up in being a cultural um, entrepreneur, cultural worker, cultural manager. Um, so for me, a cultural experience and curating that has so many aspects to it. One part of it, which I'm currently deeply engaged with, is audience development. Is this a term that many of you have heard of before? No? Okay. Some might have. Okay. So a mixed response over there. So audience development is really um, what spaces like to engage with when we're looking at the long term life of our cultural space. So what is it that a people like to consume, to watch, to read, to hear, to understand? What is it that they have not yet come across? And how is it that we can help curate that experience for them? That's such a critical bit. And the third is, what is it that there is no other way of being able to engage with except in a cultural institution? So, for example, really, really difficult topics like um, violence in all its forms. What is the safest way that we can perhaps curate an experience where the understanding of violence can be communicated to people? So, one example is so there's a festival that runs in Goa for about 10 days called the Serendipity Arts Festival. In 2018, I was part of a small boutique firm that worked in the arts that did many, many things, one of which was impact studies. And so we did an impact study for the Serendipity Foundation for the Arts. And that was one of the most eye opening exercises in my life because part of it, this primary research exercise that we went through, meant talking to all of the people, well, not all, a sample of the people who came into the festival itself, and to understand what exactly they were engaging with the festival for. Um, so, what I found was beyond the cultural experience, they were coming to learn about things. They were coming to see. In Goa, there were school children of this little girl's age who had never seen Kathakali. Now imagine how powerful an experience that is when your worldview is still so open to suddenly see something so little magical, right? Kathakali, a little scary also for those kids. There were a few that were crying as well. Um, but what is it that we can then do to curate experiences that go beyond the cultural? There's a wonderful food lab that also happens at Serendipity Arts Festival. Pardon? Yes, Locavore, Edible Archives. There have been several organizations that have been involved in that. And the Food Lab really, it's such a cultural experience, but we don't often think of it as a cultural experience, right? Cultural is often what is up on a stage or up on a wall. Whereas this is, please come. Don't worry, just. Um, and in this food lab, the kind of conversations that happened there were terrific. So there were ajis who were discussing recipes, saying, "Oh, maybe you should try something else." When they were talking, when it was a pickle workshop, and then there was a really young, like 18-year-old girl who was saying, "Oh, this is the first time I'm making pickle in my life. I've seen it being made my whole life at home." Um, but dialing back into what does that experience look like, and how can a curator change a person's worldview, a person's life. Um, I'll pause here to again invite you to think of how are you curating experiences as well. So when you invite someone home for dinner, for example, what is it that you're giving to them that is perhaps something they've never tasted before? Or perhaps you're giving them a glimpse into your world. That's so much a part of curation, right? Um, Within the broader circle of experiences, we've talked about cultural, we've talked a little bit about creative. The third is spiritual. Now, for me, a spiritual experience is deeply linked with the cultural. I cannot separate the two. Um, this was an interesting question that came up for us. I worked on a project again with the ArtX company. We built India's first web portal website that actually talked about festivals in India that were not necessarily Holi, Diwali, Dashera, etc. It was the first time an archive of Bengaluru Habba, of Serendipity, of what are the other festivals that you can name? Jaipur Lit, yes, film festival, so on and so forth. Zero, exactly. Yes. So the idea was to build an archive and a living archive. Also, a space where you could actually go and say, okay, I'm going to Rajasthan in October. What can I see? There were Hajar festivals over there in October, right? Um, so, how are we as a society curating experiences which are not just resting in the hands of curators who have curator in their title, but how are we together um, really engaging with these spaces, with these experiences, and so on. So for me, it was very clear when we started this research project that would eventually get to this web portal that a festival was basically art and culture. And then we said, okay, what about the Durga Puja, right? What about Ganesh Happa? What about Margari, right? Those are um, perhaps not Margari so much, but they use arts and culture as a vehicle to reach something higher, right? So that's spiritual experience. And that's when we started getting tripped up as researchers. How do you define arts and culture? How do you define an arts and culture festival? So then, do we include Durga Puja in that list? Do we not include it? Because the most amazing performances and artists also perform there. So we didn't really have an answer for that. And I think it's a question that we're still sort of grappling with, but I love it. I love the fact that there is so much uncertainty and so much room for exploration to see especially in India, what is it that we consider arts and culture? Um, and then the third concentric circle, which is sort of the closest, um, I look at again in threes. I look at it in terms of learning, being, and relational. So I've just returned from the the first of its kind cultural leadership fellowship, which is being run by the Bridge, which is part of the Serendipity Festival, which is probably why I'm also talking about them a lot. Um, for me, as an arts manager, I still had to leave the country to go study arts management. Um, in any sort of formal way, because us Indians, we love our degrees, right? So I had to go get a degree with a engineer father and a doctor mother. I couldn't escape it. So I said, okay, fine. I will go do an arts management degree. And to this day, in India, we don't really have a, a training program for something that is non-artistic. So there is a lot of opportunity if you wanted to learn a particular art form, they exist. But if you wanted to learn how to manage it, how to administer it, how to curate it, how to, all of these other aspects that wrap around a performance or wrap around an exhibition, to this day, we don't have it. And that is something that I went abroad in 2010. We're now in 2026, and this is the first fellowship that has come up that will actually talk about the ancillary. Uh, so this is how I'm curating my learning. I started with a formal degree. Well, actually, I started with on-the-job training with Jagriti. Went on to formal training in the US, which when I came back, surprise, surprise, I couldn't apply anything because the contexts are so different, right? Starting with the way we fundraise. Over here, it's largely corporate houses that support the arts. In the US, in the West, there is a lot of what they call individual giving. So individuals are habituated to donate a small amount on a month-on-month basis. So starting from there, those contexts are completely different. And so that is how I'm curating my learning. I suspect that when all of us in the room go to a space, go to a center, go to an experience where um, we haven't really seen something before, or we're going into a space where we're challenged, our notions are challenged, I'd say that that would be you curating your own learning. But again, I'd invite you to think about how are you curating your learning journey. It doesn't have to be obviously in the arts and culture. It could be in the way you're changing your cooking, which is frankly an art as well. Um, it could be engaging with philosophies of this world. That's how I see curation in our own personal lives, in that deepest concentric circle um, of experiences. I'm going to pause here as we look at the second bit, which is being. Um, and I'm going to invite you to either take out a notepad or your phone, somewhere you can make a note. We'll do another 3-minute exercise. This is not to be shared with anyone else, it's just for yourselves. Um, to answer one question first, what is it that you would subtract from your life right now? It could be anything. What is it that you would subtract? It could be something deeply personal. It could be something utterly silly. Maybe I want to throw out a pair of shoes. That's also very valid. The tough one is people. Are the people you want to subtract? And think of things that you don't. This exercise is not for you to necessarily act on it immediately. It's just a thought exercise. And then I want you to take another minute to think about, now that you have made room in your life with the things that you can subtract, what would you add? Would you add more experiences? Would you add maybe travel? I think that's a favorite one. Would you add rest? Without the tension of actually having to do it. Stay with the thought exercise. What would you add to your life given the choice? Okay. Thank you very much. That was 2 minutes of curating your own life. Next step, of course, is to see what you can do about it, whether you can actually implement it or not. But just the fact that you have taken this space, these literal 120 seconds, which I don't know if many of you have a chance to do that in your busy lives. I certainly don't, and I didn't until this week, where I was forced to sit and think about this. And as unwilling as I was then, I did find it quite useful. So, this is where I want to leave you with this thought. How are we really curating our lives? What is it that we're adding? What is it that we're subtracting? Are they cultural experiences? Are they non cultural, creative, culinary? My favorite. And what is the life that you want to build? What does it look like? Thank you.
Hi, Dipti.
Hi.
Thank you for that. That was actually quite provocative. I have a bunch of questions, but probably the core theme which keeps coming to me is space building. I was not aware of that there is such a thing, for example. So thank you for putting a label to that. Uh, how would you go about starting space building in places other than Bangalore? Because that was a fascinating exercise we did of 2 minutes where we came up with so many amazing spaces over here in Bangalore. A lot of places, especially up north or Delhi is, of course, the capital, but the smaller towns, they do not have this many spaces available. So if, let's say, you were to start there, in space building. Is it even possible? First question. And if yes, how do you have gone about it? Because I think there's also ties to your own observation about how the US culture and over here differs. Is it coming from institutions? Is it coming from the community? The audience building, does that happen from the space itself going out? How do we bring people to here? Or it goes the other way around, that does it happen from the community? What kind of space does this community need? So bunch of questions like I said, but how do you approach if you were to start somewhere other than Bangalore, somewhere smaller, tier 2 town?
That's a big question. I believe you can arrive at it from both ends. If you were to go from the route of community building, first I would want to understand what does the community want? What does the community not have because that's an important gap that is also, while being important, easy. When you see a gap, you can find ways to fill it. So from the community, I would want to understand that first. What I find is that when it comes from the community, it's already happening very organically. What I've noticed is, let's take Bhopal, for example. Um, Bhopal is already very rich in the classical arts, right? We've got um, gurukuls over there, we've got gharanas based over there. But what we're seeing now is a mushrooming of these cafes, these alternative spaces. And I think the way to understand why that's happening is because it's coming from the community. They're going into spaces that exist, spaces that are open to creative expression, but most importantly, spaces that are open to gathering. That's what a cafe is at its heart, right? Um, and whether or not it's a curated space is something that would depend again on what is the need of the hour, of the community, of the location. What is that need? Similarly, if I were to identify a gap as someone with pots and pots of money, um, I could potentially build an art center. But it would continue to be an empty shell if I wasn't able to look at what the community wants, what drives community, what drives gathering, what drives the audience. So, in a way, in the cultural sector at least, and the way I approach it, everything comes back to audience. Who are the minds that you're reaching? Who are the souls that you're reaching? Um, so my starting point would just be research. I feel in India, there is plenty of opportunity, which is something that I find much more of over here than anywhere else in the world. The West is basically saturated, in my opinion. Um, but in India, we're rife with possibility. We're rife with opportunity. Even without pots and pots of money, there are so many spaces that are mushrooming, that are connecting with people and bringing art as a way of expression, if not actual performance. So that's how I would approach it, to understand the the fertile ground in which we're trying to build something.
So audience identification first,
Yeah.
the programming around it.
Yeah. I would step away from the words audience and programs to begin with. I would first want to understand what the community is like. And then I would create experiences for them. And then go into programming and then calling them an audience. So I would say the more organic, the better chance for success of a space.
Hi. So I've been to both spaces you've curated, Map and Jagriti. Actually, two of my favorite places. So my question is, if you are curating an art space within the city where there are space limitations, and let's say it's a very small space that you have and you want to make an art center out of it, do you have any suggestions, tips, or any challenges you've faced because of the size of the space?
I will answer that with something that might be slightly annoying. The more constraints you have, the more creative you'll be. That's a non-answer, right? Um, no, but I would say that if you are looking at smaller spaces, you have the opportunity to build something that is truly intimate. Then you focus on the work, on the experience, on the people who will perhaps start with engaging in conversation. There is also, in the creative ecosystem of Bangalore, we now have PCPA Chaudhaya, we've got the Christ University. These are large 1,000 2,000 seat indoor spaces. We've got your even bigger ones, which is your Phoenix Market City, which is shutting down temporarily, not the whole mall, just that space. We've got Terraform for the 3,000, 5,000 capacity performances. We've got the very small, up to 50. Right, we've got many of these. This is one example of the space. It just depends on who is doing what. So we have film clubs, we have conversation spaces, we have jam rooms, etc., etc. What we don't have enough of, and this is where Bharavi, I think, will also talk about this, another curator in the room, is that band between 200 and 400 capacity venues. There are a few, but they're not enough. And the reason I've broken all of these into bands, and I'll come back to your question of very small spaces, is each space serves a different purpose. Right? If you imagine who can play in a 3,000, 5,000 capacity venue, pardon me, versus what can happen on a stage where 1,000 people can actually experience it. I feel like somewhere you're thinking of performances that you've been to before, and you may be able to place them. Again, that's curation, right? So you're all basically curating with me. When you talk about those very small spaces, I feel like those are critical for the first phase of audience development, which is community, bringing people together. And from there, it can go in any different direction. But if we don't have that space to gather, which is far more personal than going to a 1,000-seater or a 500-seater to watch and share a cultural experience, then we're lost in the fabric of a cultural ecosystem. So each of these spaces is critical. And so even a small space, how would I approach it? Again, I would just go back to the community. I would look at first, where am I located? A crowd in Indiranagar is very different from a JP Nagar, is very different from a Kadu Bisanahalli, which is very different from where Yeshwantpur. And that's where I would begin. So it's similar to the answer to the previous question. Where am I located? What am I trying to do with this space? Once that answer is somewhat emergent, then you'll find that the smallness of the space no longer ceases to exist. Somehow, there's some magic that happens. Yeah. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Kind of. There isn't an answer. There is a process and there is a approach which changes with each person. So this is how I would approach it. Yeah.
Deepthi, so I'm curious to learn about your experience with the courtyard. Like, how did you go about finding that space, or was it something that you were invited to? Because it seems like a very housing kind of a locale. It's very different from a Jagrati theater or any kind of auditoriums. So, how about that? Like, how did you find that space? And how does one go about finding these kind of spaces if they want to curate an experience? If you have any thoughts.
So I was invited into the space. You're right in that it's not quite your Jagrati. It's not a Rangashankara. But I would disagree in what you said about it seems like it's more residential. So yes, it is, but I find that KH Road sort of takes the bulk of the attention rather than the Shantinagar spaces on either side. How did I find the space? This is where cultural patronage plays a big part. Because it was the owner of the property that said, I want to do something more. Right? It was already a cafe. But she said, I want to really do something and really bring people together. And so that's how it began. So it first began where we wouldn't touch the house itself. So we built out that have you been to the courtyard? You have, okay. So that middle space where there's a lawn and then there's film screenings sometimes, right? So we sort of said we'll make that a neutral space. And the part that now has the middle room and has the conservatory, that was what was built out. And it was built out such that it didn't require too much infrastructural input. Now, Akhila herself is an architect, right? And the smallness of Bangalore, right? I'm sure each of you will have one story like this. I met Akhila when I was working as a corporate communications person, the only non-arts job I've done at Venkatraman and Associates. Venkatraman and Associates were the ones who designed and built Jagrati. And funnily enough, full circle for me, they've also designed and built PCPA. So that's how it happens. That's the relational part which I miss talking about very much. But that's the relational aspect of professional work apart from life. So how do we find these spaces? It's tough. Because in the arts, there's always a lack of ready funds, right? And that is the reality. Whether it's sad or it's a reflection of society, it is tough. So one begins in a space like this, graduates to something that's larger once it becomes available. Panchavati, for example, wasn't particularly active as a venue. Have many of you been there? You have. Was it through the Habba that you went? Yeah? Okay. um, so how do you reimagine the space? How do you reimagine a space? I think that is the real question. So you can go and find an old bungalow, you can find a coffee shop, you can find a co-working space. But building out a space often comes with cultural patronage as the starting point. And then you go into what is the audience you want to have, what is the vision for the space, and so on and so forth. So the approach is this, or rather this side, rather than community. Yeah. Yeah. You had a question, yes.
So I wanted to understand your experience around. So you curated some space, and the community didn't respond well. So you have to change few things. So I want to understand your experience on that.
Ooh, that's every curator's nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Um, the way I would approach it, and I have seen that happen before, um, I think the creative impulse to curate something or curate a space comes from a vision. What do I want to put into this space? And I will use my experience, my knowledge, my networks, my understanding of what is good quality. And I'll sort of fill this space with that. And if there isn't a response, it means there is a disconnect in that audience development bit. So I keep coming back to that. There are many routes than one can take, right? My personal understanding of what a space should be like, it needs people energy. So I don't see any reason to curate things that are not getting an audience. It's a tough one. It's hard for me to say that as well, because you come in with an idea of what is good, what people should be consuming, etc. But if you're not reaching them in the first place, then it makes sense to step back. But I would still say step back, give the catchment audience something that they can actually engage with first. If it's stand-up comedy, then it's stand-up comedy, right? Which is not to say it's bad. It's just different from perhaps something that you had in mind. If you started off as a comedy club, great. What else can you do? But I would say that's the starting point. We have to meet the audience where they want to be. And then slowly we start taking them on a journey. And this is long-term thinking. Yeah. So if I now say, okay, I know who the people are who are coming in for stand-up comedy. What else might they be interested in? Maybe a comedy play? Maybe. Maybe in that play, there is a musician who is really great. Maybe I'll do a small music show. And like that. Maybe I can do a workshop. Maybe there are students in the vicinity who haven't yet discovered the space. Maybe I'll do a workshop for them. So then we start throwing darts on a dartboard. Right? Curation is basically darts on a dartboard, as far as I'm concerned. Until you get to a point where you really know what your audience wants. So I would say it comes back to audience development. What is it? What is it that the people who you want to engage with, whether or not you consider them an audience, whether you consider them a community, what is it that they want, and then take that journey with them.
Bit of a broader question, but like when you look at the arts landscape in India, then you see Bangalore and Mumbai and Delhi and then Goa, and people say like, oh, like they consider Delhi and Mumbai, at least for the art spaces, like more advanced or at a later stage. But I also look at art cities around the world, and I wonder like there's Bangalore. We have a lot of art spaces. We have performances, artists coming in, performing. But what can, and you coming from the PCPA side, what can we do more to sort of support the arts? And also, what do you think it will take for Bangalore artists to create new art forms? Right. So that's when we really become like an art city. I would say, I just want to hear your thoughts on like, you already run a space or you've built spaces that support artists, but what do you think are the gaps and what, yeah, like just to support artists more and create more art forms? I guess that's my question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll be biased and say that I think Bangalore is in a great space for cultural work. It's not as commercial as Bombay is, which is why Bombay can be seen as more successful. I think Bombay has a culture, and please feel free to chime in with your own thoughts. My sense is Bombay, because it has a commercial aspect to it, not only are audiences used to paying to watch the arts, I have had out and out fights with people who have said, how dare you charge me for a kacheri? This is my birthright. I should not have to pay to listen to Carnatic classical music. So I asked him one simple question. I said, how do you think the artist survives? And he had no answer. So it's an awareness of what goes into making the arts, what is a creative career. And that's also audience development. It's helping audiences understand what it takes to actually do this day in and day out. So going back to the example of Bombay, because the audiences are open to paying for the arts, there is also a community, a large community of people, of course, with the Bollywood film industry. You have all your dancers, you have musicians, you have writers of plays, of movies, of scripts, and so on. So it is an ecosystem that is approaching complete because you've got supply and demand. Over here, what happens is because we don't have as much of either a paying audience, we're much more price sensitive as a city. What you would pay over here to watch Rahman in concert, A.R. Rahman, versus what a Bombay audience would pay. Or maybe if you were in Bombay, you would automatically sort of say, okay, yeah, I can pay this much more, right? At the NMACC, the Nita Mukesh Ambani Cultural Center. So one part is willingness to pay a certain amount. The other part is because it's not as lucrative, you start seeing the entire comedy industry has shifted to Bombay, where when we first started, I was at a company called Only Much Louder in Bombay. They were the ones who started the NH7 Weekender Music Festival. They were also at the forefront of your Tanmay Bhatt, Kannan Gill. I produced Kannan and Biswa's second ever live show after pretentious movie reviews, you know. Um, and Kannan is Bangalore. Kenny Sebastian is Bangalore. All of these folks found that it made more sense to move to a Bombay. Um, so it's a mix of that. It's ecosystem. Delhi, on the other hand, there is a lot of government support. I personally don't know if I could find so many things to do in Delhi from a cultural standpoint. That's me. And I probably need to learn more about Delhi. But the number of venues that exist over there, I feel, are already less than Bangalore. So I think we're one up. Anyone disagreeing? Disagreeing? Great. Tell me.
India Habitat Center, India International Center, the entire Joel Park region, British Township, American Library, like about JNU and everything that happens there is entirely totally all the time. Bunch of things happens in like South Delhi, near Sake, built in the dancing space, tons of stuff. Monday House, full of theater, like really
Okay.
not place.
Okay. Okay.
It's performed for free, like it just
That's the issue.
no, that's not the issue. I'll come to it. That's my question.
Go ahead.
So yeah, first of all, like I mean, it's more of a reflection. It's not a question to you. And I have also incredibly benefited from like everything that happens in Bangalore, both for my curiosity but also for my sustenance. But one reflection I have had over like I've been here for 3 years now is that all the spaces, be it BIC or Science Gallery or MAP or wherever I've seen like a good footfall is either coupled with large real estate projects or people who have sort of pumped massive money into it, right? So
Absolutely.
it became a lot about space. And also it's coupled with cultural capital that has already accumulated there. So even the kind of audiences, or let's say the artists they're calling to perform, those artists themselves have audience, right? So in the sense, let's say if I were to start a new space, right, in a, I don't know, like probably some BTM stage 4 space where people generally don't come for events kind of stuff. So I will start curating with artists who themselves have, let's say, be it Instagram following or those kinds of things. So those, and this is what I've seen happening here, like, a lot. Because even when we were, let's say, naming out, spaces, event spaces. So what about, let's say, places like Ragi Kana or places like Desi Trust, which do these little, let's say, workshops or for working mothers, right? And of, let's say, I don't know, probably not of the same socioeconomic class as we see in a lot of these spaces, right? And what it has done is that it has resultantly created a ghettoization within the city. So while everybody flocks to 6 p.m. BIC every day, right? And this whole thing about offering events for free. I actually spoke to a few people who curate a lot of events at BIC that what is this like whole free business, right? Like why you guys are, into this. Now, if imagine an artist who is, and again, like these are reflections from artists who also perform at IHA and these things, right? So they are getting to perform one show in BIC in an year, right? And that is also after multiple timelines and you make applications and get selected and all. But because they've offered that one free show at BIC, which BIC paid them for, and we didn't have to get the tickets, now they are struggling through the year to do any ticketed event at all. Right. So nobody has to, like BIC probably can charge 50 or 100 rupees. So at least people come with that expectation that we should pay for art, right? Now offering that one show for free, they are struggling through their entire, like taking those shows anywhere. And artists have shared that even universities which have proper established departments of performing arts, even they don't want to pay these artists anything. And such is the condition with all the dancers and I mean multiple people in a lot of freelancing communities really. So Yeah, I mean that's basically it. I can go on about it, but there are these handful of 3-4 spaces, whether it's PCPA, right, and it's always coupled with like booming a great like real estate project and sort of start calling people over there. So I feel it's more of a benefit to them as well. Beat Bangalore Habba as well, right? I mean, look at all the artists.
So I want to stay with the mic. What is it that's bothering you about this?
I
Because
mean,
there are many things.
yeah.
Many things that bother me about this also. What is it that you want to explore specifically?
So specifically, I want to explore that. Let's say, a lot of this curation should be happening in the context of the city, how the city is blooming, and also, let's say, so we don't need 1,000, 2,000 sitting spaces, auditoriums, right? What we need is like spaces like probably like IHA or something where you can access classical music training, classical dance training for really accessible, affordable prices, right? Because we also want the number of artists to grow. If you create one space and offer everything for free over there, still there are only fewer number of artists and teachers who can engage there, right? And everybody will have to go to that one place. Instead, if you create 100 spaces in the city with that same capital investment target, right, you end up creating, see how many jobs for so many artists, right? And these are freelancers. They only depend on these kinds of places unless they will ever probably, amass enough wealth to create a little studio in some corner. For instance, there's a place called Beru Art and Cultural Foundation in Hoysala Nagar, right? And it's a sort of a very sort of remote place in that sense. And there are these artists who have come from different sort of, I don't know, folk communities from Tamil Nadu, different places. And even people who are coming to perform in BIC for that one nice evening event, there is work before and after that, which is to host them, to set up their stage and everything. And these are people who are doing that. So right, but it only comes as, let's say, a one thank you note after the performance is done. Okay, thank you guys, you helped us put up this event, right? But these people are still not getting supported at all, and they have all the fancy European degrees, by the way. They are A1 on that as well. But it's Bangalore is not offering them space.
Yeah, it's a flawed system for sure. What I find interesting in everything that you just spoke about is you picked up this term accessibility, right? So the then director of BIC, Ravi, and I had a fairly public debate on this on the BIC stage at a panel hosted by the British Council. So see the connections and how many players there are in bringing this conversation about. BIC's vision in their defense or BIC's vision is to make the arts accessible. That is why they insist on free performances. That means the performances are free for the audiences. There are certain different models where if you rent the space, you can charge a ticket and so on and so forth. But whatever BIC curates, it is with the mandate of accessibility to the arts. Now, here is where the system is broken. What they are doing is admirable. And it takes a lot of work, a lot of infrastructure, like you said, corporate support, personally benefiting initiatives. Why does the BIC exist? It is a cultural space, but yes, it is it is benefiting various individuals. The part that's broken is that even though it's a free event, it is only the people who can pay who still come. Right? It's not as inclusive as a Rangoli Metro Arts Center. Right? And that's the tough part. How do you begin to address that as a curator? I don't have the answer to that. And this is exactly what we were talking about because Ravi says we have to make the arts accessible and free. My counterpoint was artists have to be able to make a living out of it for the betterment of society. Then we talked about, but if it's not free, it's not accessible. And I said, who is actually accessing it? I'll give you another example. Serendipity Arts Festival, right? I keep coming back to that because it was such a learning experience for me. it happens in the city of Panjim. It takes over pretty much all of Panjim. It used to be completely free. Now, in their 10th year, they've just started charging $200 per event, 500, so on and so forth. In those first 10 years, what was discovered is, you talked about cultural capital, there's also social capital, right? And there are these invisible barriers to arts and culture events where your local sabzi wala will not go even though it's free. And that is where the real work is for us as an ecosystem. Absolutely. Ravi has also said we are largely talking in elitist circles, elitist curators, elitist ish artists. How do we go beyond that? It's a continuous process. It's not something that's suddenly going to change because spaces will respond to the kind of people that come to it. So if you have a space that looks elitist with its lovely granite floors, beautiful glass, etc., you'll have a certain set of people who will say, yes, I can go and walk in at any time and I will not be stopped. What are these other spaces which don't look like fancy granite, yada, 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 where people will actually come, take time out of an incredibly busy life, which is sometimes at the level of survival, sometimes it's just, I don't have the bandwidth, mental bandwidth to engage with anything else. Where do they go? So the city doesn't have spaces for that yet, I feel. Or they do in small bits. So there's no answer to that. But yes, go ahead. Nammakatte, Ragi Kana. Yeah. Yeah. I think the moment you enclose a space, like even the Rangoli Metro Arts Center, even there I find there is a little bit of like barrier that has come up. Yeah, I genuinely don't have the answer, and that is something that I know that I need to engage with more. I think Bangalore Hub is also trying to do that in many ways, because some of the same people are involved in the festival. The mandate of free has come up again.
Yeah, just to this point, I just want to press because this ticketing aspect has been quite misunderstood. Like people don't want to pay for things and whatever, like, oh, people are only coming for free events, or like you said, Bangalore people don't want to pay for I don't
And
know.
then there's entitlement, and there are many
I mean,
layers to it.
But
Yeah.
yeah, like if people pay for all kinds of stuff here, like I've found like the most whatever people, even with not so much disposable income, are like throwing money on things here.
Yeah, on
So
movies,
everything.
Durandar movies. Sorry. Uh, right. Uh, so so then it comes down to value,
Yeah.
and then it comes down back to my favorite, audience development. Right? It's not an easy one. It's a very, very tough one. Yes.
Yeah. So in the beginning, you talked about like the fancy degrees and like you have to go out and study art management.
that was
and,
a very personal-
become a
yeah.
curator. I mean, right. So if someone doesn't have it, like how can they start working with it? Or like it's just cold approach plus networking, or like you can share some tips about it.
Most people working in the arts in India don't have fancy degrees. I went out and got one because it was almost like a family thing, right? And yeah, he's grinning because we just discovered we're from the same community, a community of doctors, lawyers, etc. So just to be baseline, I had to go get a master's, and I said, okay, I'll one up you, and I'll go abroad and I'll do it. But no, in India, you don't need a fancy degree. In fact, when I was applying and when I got in, and before I went, a lot of my peers said, you don't need this. A lot of my managers and people senior to me said, just, figure it out. And that's what most people are doing here. What I feel the degree gave me was new ways to think. These terms of audience development, of different approaches to grant writing, of different approaches to fundraising, and so on and so forth. Program evaluation was a eye opener for me. Someone who's in the arts, I don't know how many people in our creative sector think about program evaluation because it's a really tough one. It means you have to remove yourself from the artistic process. You have to bring in a level of objectivity, which is already difficult in the creative sector. But once that bug got into my brain, it led to things like audience development, metrics. And so then there is this group of arts managers whose sole job it is to raise funds. Therefore, you have to be able to tell stories. You have to be able to tell about the impact of the work, the impact of the space. All of these are not terms that are new. Sorry. All of these are not terms that are new. But it's hard to apply them to something that is so joyful as the arts. So, not necessary. You just have to be able to find the right people who have that kind of clarity of thought, and then it happens. Yeah.
How,
Yes.
yeah. Like, how do you figure out audience in different areas like JP Nagar versus Indra Nagar? And I mean, like, do you do a survey or do you talk to them, or how do you go about it?
It's a mix of how you collect data points. Mm, you look for the existing reference points first. So in JP Nagar, it's Rangashankara. It's also Courtyard Kuta to a certain extent, very different spaces. In Indira Nagar, again, so existing reference points. If you didn't have those reference points, in any case, primary research is important. So going out, doing surveys, talking to people, doing polls, and so on and so forth. So it helps to have a team that can actually craft these questionnaires, craft a plan of how to create this.
You actually do that before you
Yes.
create an answer.
Yes. So, funnily enough, before I was hired by the PCPA to run the space, I was hired by them to do a strategy project. So, I, along with the former director of the IME, the Indian Music Experience, Manasi Prasad, and an organization called Riti, the three of us got together and we developed a plan for the PCPA. So, part of that included surveys of people who came to the mall, which is so the PCPA is part of a joint development. So there's the Forum South Bangalore Mall, there's the PCPA in the center, and then there's Prestige Falcon City, which is a bunch of apartments. So it was surveying them, surveying mall visitors, surveying people in the wider area. We did a small study to begin with because it was a sample, but that continues. That primary research, what are you interested in? How many times have you come? Now, as we've been doing shows for about 3 years now, we have a certain amount of database. So then it's a matter of checking in with audiences regularly. Have you liked what you've seen? Some data already comes to us because we can see how many people have come back. Have they come back with more people? And so on and so forth. So it's really based on research. Yeah, that's
Like courtyard community, it's a very unusual space, like in cage or double room.
Yeah.
Like, you want to have an arts and culture.
Yeah. That was an interesting example of creating FOMO. I feel. I don't know how many of you think of the conservatory. The conservatory is all about pop-up chefs, and Bangalore didn't have too much of a culture of that. We saw that a lot in Bombay and Delhi. In Hyderabad also, actually, a little bit, if I'm not mistaken. But in Bangalore, this whole semi-celebrity chef come for a culinary experience, etc. I think that the conservatory specifically is a great example of I'm going to do this and you're going to enjoy it and you're going to come because they leaned on. You were saying you bring the people who have their own audience. That's very much part of audience development. You kind of have to do it. You lean into the people who will bring the people in, and then you start bringing in people that they don't know, right? So it's an excellent example of that. So I'm going to do this. I have a vision. I have my network. People will come. The cheat in that is, of course, the people who were involved also had a wide Bangalore network. Yeah. So it's your friends and family. That nobody can escape friends and family. Those are your first audience. They're your first donors. They are your first everything. Yeah. Yes.
I have a question. Yeah, so I'm going to paraphrase it by saying I'm not big on art, and whatever my exposure is mostly because of friends that I have.
Sure.
And so I don't know how to phrase this question, so it's going to be just jumbled up words that I'm going to throw at you. I think in Bombay, in Delhi, and I think what he also said, there is an outlet of using public spaces by artists to showcase their work.
Like?
It's notorious, but say Marine Drive, for example, but it's filled with influencers. I don't know, good or bad. I don't know if that is good or bad also. So there is, I think, CP, as he said. And I don't know if Bangalore has, or is it good? Is it bad to use some of I mean, Bangalore, first of all, I think has very few public spaces. So given that, for example, say a Cubbon Park or something, do you think that is a good way for people to use spaces like that to showcase their artwork? Yes. I mean, I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I also don't know how to phrase this question. So I'm doing a very poor job of it, but I hopefully I'm making sense.
So, if I understood that correctly, should more artistic work happen in public spaces? That could be one question. Is there a need for artistic work to happen in public spaces?
Yeah, I think also because I think Bangalore generally is also slightly notorious of not doing anything or not allowing anything in public space, right? Like you get kicked out the moment you try to do even the smallest
Yeah.
thing, right? You want to do I think in Cubbon Park there was a
Cubbon
book
reads?
reading,
Yeah.
thing that people got kicked out for that. So yeah, my question mostly comes from that.
It came back. It bounced back. Yeah.
But it made the news that they got.
Absolutely. And I think it started from your whole in the 2000s when discotheques and dance bars were considered the same. It started from there, I think. Right? Anyone remembers that dark period when basically Bangalore was told not to dance. And then we became habituated to it. Right? And we don't really dance anymore in a public space. Um, yeah. But that's only in an occasion. We don't dance just, yeah, hopefully not on the road. But
Some communities, when they take out their hearse,
yeah,
they dance.
Yeah.
I mean, probably an odd example, but
no, it's the perfect example. Because that's again bringing where do we call what is the line of culture? That's very much culture.
connected to that, I just wanted to ask you a question. Like, how do you, as in, I mean, does a cultural space always have the same meaning or same purpose? Do you have any examples where cultural spaces have changed their purpose, or what used to be something is something else now, kind of a thing?
I should hope that they are not the same. Because if cultural spaces of different shapes and formats are all trying to do the same thing, then there's not enough room for the other.
Well,
Whatever.
since it started with some purpose, then it changed into something else. It could be positive, it could be in the negative direction, but or rather, you started with a purpose of one sort of community, and then you change course because of the cultural milieu has changed or economics have changed, things like that.
A very positive example is Courtyard again. Started off trying to host cultural performances, and then it transformed into a space for gathering for community without necessarily putting someone in front of a room, except for the chefs. But then, that's slightly different. It's a great positive example. Spaces that were not intended to be cultural but have now been co-opted as cultural, MLR Convention Center, both Whitefield and JP Nagar. Good Shepherd Convent, right? That is now like the epicenter of all of the big comedy shows go there. Much of theater, English theater goes there. It's a good example of a space that was never intended as a cultural space. It was meant to be an auditorium that would serve the Sacred Heart School. So, due to a paucity of venues, this again takes me back. So, at OML in 2014, we realized that there was this gap. This was when the comedy circuit was just sort of English. I will say, I'll qualify that the English language comedy scene was just sort of growing. The company did something that I've not seen anyone else do. They sent out about 100 of our employees, all us, me included. They paired us up. They sent us out to all the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So I went to Coimbatore and Kochi and one other space that I can't remember. And we just went and looked for spaces where comedy could happen. And at the end of that, the other spaces that I went to in Bangalore was the Indiranagar Club, Good Shepherd. At that time, they were extraordinarily resistant because they said, what, bad language, what will they talk about? All very fair, very valid questions because it is in a convent space. But now look at what it's become, right? So I think culture will find its way in through the cracks. But there are lots of examples of that. Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, it's good that you start with more democratic way of curating the life and how it seeps into other kind of thing. So I'm more curious about the formality of curating and its invisible boundaries, which brings with it actually, as again self-propagating culture which curate itself with people and things like that. So where is the interface and where, just like the Veerda said, there are two Indias. The same kind of contradiction you might be facing and how one can overcome that contradiction. Because I remember in Ahmedabad, they had done a crafts of art festival kind of thing. They'd done very public domain at Teen Darwaja, which is unthinkable, and at the Adalat and Sarkhej kind of thing. So are we going with the scale with the culture already operates actually? And then I see a lot of invisible boundary in all the curated programs. Just like you already acknowledge that Sabjiwala can't come inside. So how we can break that barrier kind of thing?
That's a tough one to answer. I think the entire creative ecosystem is trying to answer that question. So spaces like Ragi Kana, which is curated by Bhumija, Gayatri, who is part of Bhumija. Bhumija brings Nrityagram to PCPA, Mritya Katikam, a variety of shows that are very much meant for the formalized arts performance spaces. But she also does this. So that's a great example of trying to address this specific aspect of how do we make arts accessible. I think you're right that it does lie in the architecture of the spaces, public spaces that we talked about.
Yeah, I believe there are boundaries everywhere.
There are boundaries
Yes,
everywhere.
because the wall is such a strong wall.
Yeah.
Had they not done the wall, it might have been like.
Maybe. But then the people who don't like street dogs would not come.
That is part of it. I
So,
think kind of
yeah.
running the thing, how to protect.
Yeah. In contrast, when I went to NMACC, there are streeties inside the space.
Rangoli is a good model. Rangoli in Rang Shankar, I find
Yeah.
it's a seamless ground connection.
So why are those better examples? Rangashankara was built on a civic amenities site granted by the government. Rangoli Metro Arts Center again, BMRCL. It is also, yes, you're right. But totally privately funded, as opposed to the other spaces which still get government support, and therefore they have to sort of they have to operate differently. This is where I think that the role of the government comes in.
I think the Rajasthan somehow get correct with Malvika Singhvi and the Rajasthan because they chief minister a lot of things. And they also went into the spices kind of market and other kind of thing. Let the culture curate itself. And then the people started going into many kind of things.
That's a good line.
So I think the Rajasthan model really works because she said, I mean, she told Malvika that I have no money, just do what you want. And then they went on the site and IS officers and see, and because there was a top-down kind of thing, and they just went by, and then they went to gallery, and then the Rajasthan had a lot of history and things like that. And then they slowly just doing one color and doing kind of simple thing, it become accessible. And they got the cultural history of spices and the food and kind of things.
Yeah.
So somehow that I find missing. Even in the Bangalore Habba, it is still elitist kind of things. And when I'd seen the Karaga kind of thing, and then there was a play opposite the fort. And then there was a play went on for almost like 7 hours, 8 hours from 8 in the night till 6 in the morning. And they'd done a tent kind of thing and the Vijayanagara kind of thing. So kind of ephemeral, impromptu, what people are doing. So that never comes to the curated kind of scene that most of so that's why I'm saying there are two Indias. So most of the people don't know what the Pete is, or not many people have seen the Tipu's palace and the fort. So the Bangalore of the curate is different than the Bangalore which exists. And then I think Silo had done wonderful mural in the KR market actually, which is a great effort to bring all the community together kind of things.
Yeah. The mural art project and that's run out of Delhi is a great example of trying to bring
Collective what Silo?
Fearless Collective, yes. Shiloh's, yes. I think I've seen a few of the Fearless Collective's murals. The one that seems to be a bit more ubiquitous, again, with support from the government, because they have the funding for it and they're not asking the government for support, for monetary support. The example is the street art, st.art, right? Festival. And they've Aravani project again invited to do murals. And the one that I used to see every day when I lived that side of town was the SV Road, the one on the SV Road metro station. Yeah. So again, that is a public-private partnership. Kochi is another great example where the government has been specifically pushing arts and culture to happen in open spaces. One example is, of course, the Biennale. If you haven't been to the Biennale, you have. So it's wonderful because when you go in there, into all of the art galleries and all of the spaces in which they create art, you see the entire cross section of society. Yeah, all part of the Biennale. Wonderful example of an art space that the community actually doesn't feel barriers to enter. I think that's also very telling of Kochi society. There's a lot of pride in everything, right? So it also depends on the community that exists in those spaces, right? Whereas in Goa, very different. There's a lot of identity crisis happening in Goa. Am I allowed here? Am I not? Am I a settler? Am I a native? Is this, that, is that? So it's an ongoing, and we see this not just in India. We see this everywhere.
The inner cities are being underdog also.
Yeah.
Out of the inner city and its self-sustain itself.
Yeah.
And moment the inner city and other places that get take over by the new capitalist kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And then earlier, I think long back, anyway, it was Fizzler India by what they did in UK. I think here, it was really kind of forced effort about knowing our culture.
The Art Park also by S.G. Vasudev, another great example in Bangalore. Yes. So I think we're done. We're out of
Yes.
time.
We're out of time. Although I want to hijack a moment.
Huh.
I think everyone would like to know. This is a very personal thing as well for you. And we discussed that briefly, that programming does come from your personal values as well as perhaps bias. My question is, if we were to ask you what you've added and subtracted to programming as the work that you do, from a personal point of view, what would those be?
So my own personal journey was when I started working with a space in South Bangalore. I've grown up in Indiranagar. So BIC in many ways is something that's more familiar to me in terms of programming audiences and so on. What I had to do a lot of unlearning personally in PCPA. So what I'm really happy to see, I don't know if it's a product of what I've done, but I've seen so much more Kannada theatre take the big stage. The only other space I feel that Kannada theatre has had a largest space is the Ravindra Kalakshetra. But there's this, I don't know if it's a loaded term, but the aspiration to perform on a big stage is something that I think I'm happy to be able to offer to local artists, regional theatre, and so on, which I wasn't seeing previously. Personally, again, I could be wrong, and there may be dissenters here. So I'm very happy to see a lot of that happening. I've also noticed that there is more art that was previously only in the east or the central part of Bangalore coming to the south. Bangalore now, because of traffic and road infrastructure and so on, civic infrastructure, it's getting more and more difficult to travel across town, of course, metro lines notwithstanding. But just to imagine going to if you live in a JP Nagar, to go to Chaudhaya every weekend is tough. It's just tough, right? So to be able to open out that avenue for cultural exploration in Bangalore has been very exciting for me. And I hope that will continue to grow. Yeah.
Thanks, Dipti. And I think as we progressed with the talk, I think it was like we were slowly drawn into it. And I'm sure there are a lot more questions. I have tons of questions. So thank you. From 2018, when you decided to support Creative Mornings when we needed it, and we continue, of course, to need it.
And we curated it together. Yeah.
Yeah. To now, having to hear your story and actually go deep into what curation means in so many senses of the word. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you all for joining.